This is number 48 Doughty Street, home for 2 years in the 1830s to the novelist Charles Dickens. These days, it's the Dickens Museum, though it's currently closed for refurbishment ahead of the 200th anniversary next year of the novelist's birth. And this is Devonshire Place, the site of a much larger house here on the corner that Dickens moved into after Doughty Street. In all, the adult Dickens lived in more than a dozen homes in London. They're all described in a new biography, Charles Dickens' A Life by Claire Tomalin, a portrait of an extraordinarily restless, driven man who was also a writer of genius. And this is Marshalsea Road in Southwark. Dickens himself never lived here, but his father was locked up in the old Marshalsea prison on this site for debt, and it features in one of Dickens' most famous novels, Little Dorrit. Not far away is the George Inn in Borough High Street, which Dickens knew well, and that's where we went to meet the author. Claire Tomalin, there have been so many books about Dickens down the decades, scores if not hundreds. Why write a new biography?
If you think of any great person, there will be many portraits, or you hope there will be many portraits, painted portraits. Nobody says, we don't need another portrait of Byron. Everybody wanted to paint Byron because he was such an interesting figure. I think the same is true of biographies. A man like Dickens can be approached in so many ways. There are always new things to say about him. So having written a book in which Dickens had a bit part 20 years ago, The Invisible Woman, which was about Ellen Ternan, who was his companion for the last 13 years of his life, I thought I rather owed it to Dickens to take a wider look at him.
Let's talk about Ellen, or Nellie Ternan, who was an actress and his mistress. She's divided Dickens' biographers down the decades, and indeed the early ones sort of pretended she didn't exist, didn't they?
Well, she didn't exist because she was very carefully concealed and the family didn't want her mentioned, understandably. And Dickens did a terrifically good job, and she did a very good job too on blotting it all out. It was generally accepted that she was his mistress, I think, until Peter Ackroyd suddenly announced that he found it inconceivable that she could have been. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, Dickens's two most intelligent children, Henry and Katie, both actually said that there had been a love affair and that there had been a child. I think we can accept what they said.
The relationship with Nellie Ternan is one of the things that shows Dickens at his worst. One of the things that comes across very strongly from the book is what an extraordinary man of contrasts he was. And the treatment of his wife, whom he left for Nellie, really doesn't show him in a good light, does it?
The treatment of Catherine, his wife, was deplorable. He humiliated her in private and in public. The division of the bedroom, you know, he retreated to a room so that everyone in the house, everyone in the family knew what he had done. And then the public statements, the statement in the press in England, the letter published in America in which he accused her of being mad, having episodes of madness, which is completely untrue. And then the worst of all, the letter to their friend, Miss Coutts, Angela Burdock Coutts, telling her that Catherine had never loved her children and the children had never loved her. But I think you're a bit hard on Dickens. This episode was terrible. Dickens, as his daughter Katie said, went mad and behaved appallingly. This is something that does happen to people, midlife crisis. Apart from that, although Dickens had a temper and could sort of write people off, I think his record is amazingly good. He was a very, very good man. He was privately generous and kind. If a friend died, he would immediately be raising money to support the orphans. He was extraordinarily kind.
One of the things that comes across very strongly from the book is the extraordinary energy and drive of the man. He could be writing 2 novels simultaneously in weekly, monthly instalments. He could be editing magazines. He could be tremendously active, campaigning, helping people and so on. He never seems to have stopped.
No, it is true that he has the energy of 10 men. I think writing about him is rather like trying to write 5 biographies in one because of all these different strands in his life. I mean, he was mad keen on the theatre. And he talks about how he went every night when he was in his aspiring years, sort of learning shorthand and becoming a reporter. He would go every night to study the great actor Charles Matthews, who was a terrific impersonator of characters. And I think he learnt from Charles Matthews, in a sense, how to do voices, which of course is how he wrote his novels. He wrote them through the voices of his characters.
Even while he was such a busy man, though, he was getting completely absorbed in the process of writing on occasion. There's a very telling quote he wrote to a friend, his very close friend John Forster, at one point, about the fact that he hadn't been doing anything that week because he'd got, for fear of disturbing the state I got into and having to fetch it all back again. I think that was when he was writing Little Doris.
Yes. Oh, or possibly when he was writing The Old Curiosity Shop.
Oh, the Old Curiosity Shop.
And he was
right,
approaching the death of little Nell. It's a fascinating bit, that he doesn't want to distract himself. It was Forster who suggested that little Nell should die. Dickens took this and ran with it. He thought it was brilliant, and the public thought it was brilliant. And he has a whole series of letters to friends about how upset he is, how terrible it is that he's got to kill this child, how desperately upset he is. And he doesn't want to be distracted. He's got himself into this state to write these bits of her death, and he must hold on to it. Yes, totally involved in it at that point.
Do you have a personal favourite among the novels?
It's a very difficult question. I think perhaps the most perfect is Great Expectations. And it creates the world of his childhood, of course, the Kentish marshes. And it is full of poetry. I mean, there is in Dickens a lot of poetry as well as a lot of this dramatic imagination. And it has a wonderful account of obsessive love. I mean, quite simple statements by Pip, but they, you know, how irresistible he finds Estella. And Estella is a brilliantly enigmatic character, and it has Miss Havisham, it has so many wonderful things in it.
You've written a whole series of biographies, famously Samuel Pepys, Catherine Mansfield, Mary Wollstonecraft. Who is next?
I'm not going to do another big book. I've been too much living in my books and not living a life.
Claire Tomalin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.